Mega Man X6 has gained quite a negative reputation over the years, despised by critics and fans, you know the drill. But would I say that it's a game worth playing and one that is truly good after playing it and the rest of the series for quite a while? Absolutely. I'm open to seeing criticisms of this game, but each time I try to look for people's reasons as to why this game is some unholy abomination, while games like X1 are perfection, quote unquote, I keep seeing one simple reason. People just want more of the same. There are modifications that restore things like weapon immunity system to X6. You know, the system that actively discourages experimenting with weapons against enemies? In X6, sure, some weapons don't deal much damage to enemies, but it's the game that made me consider mastering the usage of its weapons because I didn't have to swap through the entirety of my arsenal just to find the correct weapon to kill a Monbando. Many people seem to not like games that are designed differently and therefore have to be approached in different ways. I can understand that, as I have similar reactions to some other games, but I think that it's not fair for every X6 review on this planet to ignore all things it does way better than its predecessor because of its approach. It's a game aimed at those who care more about mastering the games they play than first impressions. Because of that, I think it works far better on replays than, say, X4. For one, you can consistently avoid entire stages if you know what you're doing. I hate when I replay, say, X3 and have to go through something like Tunnel Rhino again, twice no less. Well, I also hate Bronze Caravage stage, but if you don't feel like going for 100%, you can just skip it. You can't beat the game armless partless, sure, but have you thought what made the armless run so interesting at core? It's the added challenge, the replayability, the variety of options given to you. That's exactly what the part system brings, as even an armorless player can now pick a ton of different parts and use them to spice up the run. And that's not the only thing. Parts like Saber Plus and Quick Charge make me actively miss the part system in any game that lacks them, because they make the controls feel that much better. Sure, they're definitely too powerful to be given from the start, but as upgrades you can find, they're perfect, and if you don't like them, you can just use Jumper and Hyper Dash and then move on. Calling the parts optional is wrong, as they most definitely enhance X6 in ways that I'd argue are far cooler than the gimmicky and often detrimental armor system. The game has some level design problems such as Caravage or Heatnix, but the rest of the stages are some of my favorites in the series. They're extremely satisfying to learn and consistently get through. And while that definitely hurts beginner players as there are things they don't expect in the stages, I think that stage design isn't just about being fair towards the player. There are games like Sonic Forces where barely any of the levels can be described as unfair, and yet that doesn't matter because of them all being mediocre, uninteresting, and just not fun. And while it's nowhere near as bad, the earlier X games can suffer from a similar issue where, in pursuit of being completely fair to the beginner player, some stages are so safe and flat and they stop being interesting once you start replaying the games frequently. Let's take a look at one of X1's stages, Armored Armadillo. When you get on top of a cart, in every section excluding the last one, you just wait until you get to the end of the road and then jump off. The moment you memorize what to do is the moment you learn those sections completely. There isn't really a reason to bother with the enemies since the game provides you far easier options to recover in far safer areas and ignore the cart, waste your time. There isn't much depth to how you approach the stage. Kill most enemies that get in your way, destroy or get away from the two bowlers, and spam your weapons at the final card section. On the other hand, Infinity Maginian stage is usually made fun of for being really flat and simple. However, what makes it work is the enemy placement. No matter the difficulty, you can handle the various different types of obstacles this stage has in different ways. Even on extreme, you can ignore almost every nightmare virus in the stage. In fact, this will mean getting through faster. If you want nightmare souls, you can try and destroy as many of them as possible, but that means you'll have to be careful about Illumina and the Jetbirds. Speaking of Illumina, In the second section, you can just try to dodge the lasers normally, but it'll be easier for you to destroy all 3 of them, which will make Illumina switch back to using the orbs. Or you can keep one of the lasers, which will make it easier to dodge the aiming laser attack. What is just an annoying straight line to one player to get through is an entire playground of obstacles and pathways to another. And that's not talking about the rescues, which are, just like most things in X6, very consistent and add more depth to the stages. You can ignore rescues if you don't need them, but they can hold useful upgrades or just heal you up. If you lose them, you can reload a save or move on forward without them, as the parts that can be required to beat the game, such as Jumper, are located in areas that don't have nightmare viruses, making it impossible to lose them. And the game even has a checklist for all 128 rescues, which is a nice quality of life addition when games like Mega Man 8 or Rockman and 4D provide no way for you to know how many of the bolts or CDs you forgot in a level straight from the stage select menu. In addition to that, X6 controls wonderfully, removing some of the lag and clunkiness that was present in the previous 2 32-bit entries and offering some nice tricks for you to use, such as instantly getting to max speed if you crouch before a dash. I actually enjoyed playing as Zero in particular. I've seen many people complain about his animations having too much lag, but I really like that. It gives the slashes much more weight, which is something I feel games like Inti Creates' Zero series lack in their saber moves. Not to mention, Zero's Buster in this game is great, rewarding you for getting close to enemies with devastating damage. And his techniques are also great, ranging from variation on X's Gamma option and Guard Shell to the unique and powerful Ensuizan, Shurenzan, and Rekoha. The latter being the most useful screen clear Zero ever had, as it pierces the entire screen and deals some really good damage. The Setsuizan is the only arguably bad move, but its problems are overstated. Yes, it's easy to die if you have it in Weapon Center and don't know what you're doing, but focus on the last part. Unlike say X5's Wind Shredder, it will only be a problem if you aren't careful rather than its very existence being a problem. I've also seen people mention that this game has too many instant kill hazards, while not punishing you enough for dying. Once again, we return to look at not how things were in the previous games, but rather what their purpose was. What was the meaning behind you being sent to the start of the stage upon game overing in the Super Nintendo games? To make you get better, because if that wasn't the reason, it would just be an annoying distraction. X6 employs many different ways to punish the player, from instant kill to things that barely deal any damage. The purpose of each of those, however, is to make the player learn how to avoid taking damage from them, and sure, you can brute force certain stages while being obliterated in Recycle Lab, but the intention is to make you learn how to do well in both, and that's why Recycle Lab and Amazon area work, despite one being full of instant kill hazards and the other barely having any. That said, it's also worth mentioning that there aren't even too many instant kill hazards in X6. Aside from the beginning of Secret Lab 1, for example, the gate stages don't really have any segments where the spikes are actively in your way. Rather, they're just there to make sure you can't cheese sections without thinking. That's why the instant kill hazards are there, to make the player learn how to get better at the game. Because in the Super Nintendo X games, you can just brute force through the entire game with the armors and weapons, and you've never given an incentive to do otherwise. Which is what makes X3 Sigma so charming for many people. It's not even a particularly hard fight as like most battles in that game. It's very pattern based and doesn't have many random elements, but unlike the rest, it deals a ton of damage and the hitbox is obstructed either by a shield or by the armor, which means the player has to learn how to deal with the fight to beat it. The moment you pass the intro stage in X6, you will be treated with something that will tell you how the game will treat you. And I think it's better for a game to be honest about this, especially due to how fun it is to actually learn those stages compared to the really basic ones from the previous games. And no, when I say basic, I don't mean that X6 is good just because it has hazards. What makes X6 work is how well the stages flow once you're good at them. In a stage like Storm Owl from X4, you don't really need to think about how you handle a stage to be good at it. Most of the enemies are easily dealt with default Buster or Saber, and the stage is very linear. Same applies to X3 as well, also less so to the first two games. Nightmare effects, to me, are the cherry on top. They give even more depth to this already detailed game. Yes, they do impact your playthrough and make your life harder. That's what makes them fun. There's a ton of praise given to the way X1 handles stage effects, but they're more cosmetic than anything, because if you don't want to visit that stage a ton in that game, you'll just pick the same route anyway and get the same 3 effects, none of which really do anything of worth beyond unlocking items and disabling hazards, which turns Flame Mammoth stage into an even bigger joke than it already was. On the other hand, XX provides you with options. First, you can visit a stage before it has any effects, which means you have to pick the first few stages you visit carefully, as they will impact others. That said, if you decide to be risky and say pick Maginian as the first to beat him while he's at level 1, you will get the Nightmare Dark effect, which heavily clouds your vision. However, it doesn't affect the gameplay in any way beyond that. On the other hand, for the stages affected, you can instead choose to activate Nightmare Mirror and Nightmare Rain. While those seem far easier, both of them mean that in certain sections you will have to deal with an additional hazard, either rain slowing down your movement or soul bodies appearing and trying to hit you. But if you have Guard Shell, you can deflect those soul bodies, which rewards you for using weapons. Pretty neat, isn't it? Oh, and by the way, this game has a boss level system. It's pretty neat, and it means that the more parts you're able to use, the higher the boss level is. But unlike say X5, the boss levels aren't absurd. There's a total of 4, so even if you do manage to reach the 4th boss level, health bars won't grow absurdly high. That said, X6 also changes boss behaviors with levels, making some of them harder to deal with, adding another layer of strategy not seen in other games, which I find cool. It is worth mentioning that X6 definitely has flaws. While the game barely has any glitches and the few that are there don't hinder the experience, there are some softlock situations that require you to game over or reload a save from. And Blaze Heat and 6 Age, while tolerable with screen clears and has some fun sections, gets old rather quickly. I think there's an argument to be made that not every section you dislike in a game is just a lack of testing, because if you look at even the oldest pre-release images of featuring this stage, you'll see that even though the visuals went through huge differences, bugs got fixed and layouts got altered, the health bars of the infamous Nightmare 6 were always this large. Maybe it was from a lack of testing, but could it have been an intentional decision? Was it a good one? I wouldn't say so. But I can certainly see more value in fighting the donuts than I see with almost any stage in X8, so that's a plus. Oh, and Gran Scarovich is a joke, and his stage being 2 layers of RNG was a horrible idea. That said, it's nowhere near being enough for me to call this game bad. Even after playing so many other Mega Man games, I still think that X6 is an objectively great game. One that encourages replayability and mastery and rewards the player for doing well. Without a shadow of a doubt, I would definitely say that there's more greatness within this game than just its soundtrack, and it looks cool too. However, I highly encourage you, the person watching, to write a comment expressing your thoughts on the game. If you have any questions regarding the game or you disagree with me, I'll be glad to see you comment and I will make sure to reply. And if you decide to give X6 a chance after watching this video, I would highly recommend using the original PlayStation version. Each port after this suffers from one issue or another. From the rare Korean PC port to the latest Legacy collection, all of them have their problems that the PlayStation version doesn't. Unfortunately, unless you know Japanese, you will have to deal with the horrible localization the X6 got, which is unfortunate. That said, aside from the Korean PC port, none of the versions are particularly bad. So if you can play the PS1 version and don't want to emulate it, those are still a fine way to play. But I really think Capcom doesn't deserve your money with how lazy the collections are. And if you want to have an easier time with the game, there's nothing wrong with using easy mode. It removes some of the more difficult enemy placements and decreases the health of some of them, including the Nightmare Races, which becomes far easier to deal with them because of that. Have fun! Those seem far easier. Both of them mean that in certain sections you will have to deal with an additional hazard. Either rain slowing down your movement, or soul bodies which trying to hit you, but if you have guard shell, you can deflect these soul bodies, which rewards you for using weapons.